Hi everyone, welcome to Microbiology Lab. My name is Amy Nelson and I'm your lab instructor for the semester. Unfortunately, we can't be in person in the lab this fall, but I'm going to do my best to bring the micro lab experience to you online. So each week I will present a lesson for the topic that we're covering, and then I'll go through the protocol and show you step-by-step videos of exactly what we would be doing if we were together in the lab. So today we'll start with the first and most important lesson, which is lab safety. So as you watch each lesson, you can have your notes printed out and follow along and fill in the blanks. So if you don't have them printed out already, you can pause the video now and print them so you're ready to follow along. So any student who does not comply with lab safety would not be allowed in the micro lab, and these are rules that you'll need to know in any future lab classes as well. Laboratories are classified by the level of risk of the microbes being studied, and they have certain equipment and extra precautions depending on their level. So the levels are known as laboratory biosafety levels, or BSL levels, and the highest level is a BSL level 4 lab. A BSL level 4 lab would study microbes that can be fatal and for which there are no treatments or vaccines. So very few labs are actually at this level, but an example would be a lab studying Ebola. And then BSL 3 labs study microbes that can cause serious or potentially lethal diseases through respiratory transmission. So an example of that would be a lab that studies tuberculosis. And also labs now that study coronavirus, they have to be a BSL level 3 lab. Then a BSL 2 lab studies microbes that pose moderate risk to workers and the environment. So an example of that would be Staphylococcus aureus. And then a BSL level 1 lab would study microbes that are not known to cause disease in healthy hosts and pose a minimal risk to workers and the environment. So an example would be labs that study non-pathogenic strains of E. coli. So what level are the Georgian Court micro labs? Our lab at GCU is a BSL 2 level lab. So what that means is we work with microbes that have the potential to cause illness, but for which there are therapeutic interventions. And it also means you should always be alert and careful. So this semester, everyone probably already knows what PPE is because we hear so much about it for protection from COVID. But PPE stands for Personal Protective Equipment. And that includes things like a lab coat, which is required in our lab, gloves, which are required in our lab, and PPE we now know also includes masks, face masks, and respirators. Also face shields and eye protection. Those are all different types of PPE. So what rules should be followed with a lab coat and gloves? So for instance, they should never be worn outside of the lab, not even out in the hall or in the bathroom. They should never touch doors, phones, other belongings, should never touch your skin or clothing. And that's because they can be carrying bacteria that could be spread and spread to other places. You should dispose of used gloves in red pails, which you would see in the back of the laboratories at Georgian Court. And I'm going to show you a video of how to safely remove your used gloves. And it's something you can try at home if you have a pair of gloves. So there are certain clothing safety restrictions for the lab. The first is to never wear open-toed shoes in the lab, even if you have socks on with sandals. You're never to wear open-toed shoes in a lab. The second is no shorts or dresses or skirts or tank tops that expose your skin. So if you look at this picture, it shows you the right and wrong clothing to be worn in the lab. And then the third rule is that long hair should be tied back. And that's because we work with Bunsen burners and centrifuges, and it can be extremely dangerous if long hair is not tied back. What are the common lab contamination mistakes that can make you sick? Well, food and drinks and phones in the lab are the most common mistakes. So the rules are no food or drinks in the lab or on the lab benches. So we have out in the hall at Georgian Court, outside of all the lab rooms, we have a cart that you can put any of your food or drinks on before you come into the lab. So you can leave them there before coming inside. And then you should safely remove your PPE and wash your hands anytime before going into the hall for a snack or a drink. Also, never put cell phones on lab benches. So keep your phone in your backpack at all times during the lab, except for when you're instructed to take a photo of a result. So when doing so, you would remove your gloves to touch your phone. Because of course you don't want to spread the bacteria from your gloves onto your phone. But that's a very common mistake that's made in the lab. So of course it doesn't apply to us this semester, being that we're online, but these are all really important rules that you should know for working in a lab. In microlab, you're handling live bacteria, so you should always stay focused. That means never shake any tubes of bacteria, never leave any tube uncapped or any plate uncovered. Never let the loops or the swabs or pipettes drip onto the lab benches or onto your belongings. Never let your body or clothing touch any of the bacterial samples. Always carry the tubes on a rack. And if you do spill, immediately spray the area with Lysol or Clorox bleach and wipe everything down, and dispose of your gloves and put on a fresh pair. And finally, when you're in a lab, you would thoroughly clean up after every class. So at the end of every class, you'd wipe down the lab benches with Lysol, Clorox spray. And even though you wear gloves in the lab, you should always wash your hands at the end of the lab after you take your gloves off.